So I'm Ray Fisk, and Alison Joubert, my co-author, the lead author on this project, cannot be here. She is still in Australia. She and I have worked on several projects that are part of this presentation, which is how we got involved in this one. It was her suggestion to me, and we immediately found a connection on starting this one, so here we are. So our title is Harmonizing the Living Planet. And it was inspired partially, the word harmonizing was inspired by a book that I'll get to in the presentation too. And you can see that Alison and I like cats. So we could have put other animals there, but cats. Interestingly, it's not her cats or my cats, it's other cats. One of my cats doesn't think he should ever have his picture taken. So out of respect, we kind of the picture. And she had a similar perspective. It's kind of a humorous respect for your animals issue. So let me get right to it. Here is a slide with two premises for what we are trying to set in to do in this. There's a great book, in case you haven't found it yet, Braiding Sweetgrass by Robin Wall Kimmerer from 2013, if I remember correctly. Her quote that's in the book, it's a key feature of the book, is all flourishing is mutual. Another way we think of saying that is shorter, slightly shorter version of it is life serves life. And that's really at the heart of what we're trying to say with this presentation, is that life should serve life. And of course I'm using that word serve in a very broad sense, but that's what we're trying to do. So the outline we've got for you, very simple structure. We're going to try to expand the foundations of service research a little bit further. Now, I've been part of the service research field since the early days, and that's one of my fun things to do. So, okay, this one needs more space here. So here I am again trying to broaden things. So the second topic is living with pets, and then 4 pillars of service inclusion. The inclusion topic is what Alison and I worked on before, and the last one is some implications for this. So this is very conceptual. We don't have any data. We are simply trying to encourage thinking bigger. So first off, the expanding foundations of service research. This slide basically says that service research has made significant progress in reimagining service systems, and we're citing only the things that I've been involved in, not that there aren't a lot of other things, but these are things I've been trying to push, like I was just saying, push forward with. So the first one there is 2018. That's the article I'll be talking more about on inclusion. That's when I first met Alison. She was a doctoral student at the time, and we were working on what became service inclusion. The second one is the article that we had announced CERCOLA with, Elevating the Human Experience in 2020. And the third one there is Uplifting Human Wellbeing. Brandon Keim wrote that one. That's a service ecosystem. Health is that one. So each of those was an effort to broaden things, to think bigger. So the next point there I've got on my slide is that service research is primarily focused on human-centered systems. And it's not that humans aren't important. It's that life is important. And we all know that. We all know that. But we don't always practice that. And so this is really where we're going with this. We also wanted to point out that current service research gives little attention to the many species that we co-inhabit the planet with. We just don't. We're so human obsessed. So the next line there is that it was inspired by a book that we found as we were getting into this project called Meet the Neighbors. The guy does a great job of talking about life in the neighborhood. And just does a marvelous job of describing the neighbors in his region, from a pond nearby, etc. So that phrase, kind or gentle reply that we're having fun, let's just try to think more broadly. And the last idea there is we adopt harmonizing from a book by Jeremy Lent, and I'll show you the quote in just a moment, but basically the idea of harmonizing to foster inclusive connections with humans and with life on the planet, and the animals too. So here's a quote from a book called Wellbeing by Jeremy Lent. Unlike Robin Wall Kimmerer's book, which is really short and artful, poetic, this is a deep dive. They both have a similarity. Both talk about indigenous knowledge and traditional wisdom, indigenous wisdom, traditional wisdom, and they both talk about science. So they're both trying to synthesize things. But this one is a book that's about 400 pages, if I remember right. It's a long read. But here's the quote. Could it be that the best description of how nature works is, in fact, a harmonic meshwork of life? Now, the entire book, he's talking about harmonizing 8 topics throughout, but this was the shortest, sweetest quote of all the quotes that we had in this book. And it's a recent book, 2021. I definitely recommend that one. I like Robin's book. So, living with pets then. While all animals deserve scholarly attention, we think, we begin with pets, and here's the explanation why. We have a long history as a species in domesticating pets. Now, of course, if we go far enough back in time, they weren't called pets, they were working animals, working like a hunting dog, etc. But certainly in modern times, the next line fits more effectively for modern times. Pets play important roles in human lives with frequent interactions, and even that third line, emotional connections between the animals and their humans. Especially in more modern times, that's been true. And to provide some statistics on it, more than 50% of the world's population owns pets, and for the two countries that Alison and I represent, for Australia, 69% of Australian households, it's almost the same in the United States, 66%. So lots of pets. Primarily cats and dogs, but of course lots of other pets, lots of others. And pets provide a foundation, we think, for the idea of harmonizing with the living planet because of that emotional connection. Whereas we don't necessarily have emotional connections with the fish in the ocean or the birds that are flying across the planet, but the ones we live with, we think that's a great start. And if we can do better by those animals, maybe we can continue to think bigger. So this gets us back to the pillars of service inclusion that Alison and I co-authored. We proposed 4 pillars in that article. And the 4 pillars basically are these. We thought these are each a step in service inclusion. And I should add that we've been delighted at how many other people picked up on the service inclusion idea and written various other topics tied to inclusion. Because it's a very broad issue for human systems. Across the world, there are always systems that include some people and say, you're not worthy. And that's clearly a problem. So we were proposing these pillars as a way to stop this. So the first one's enabling opportunities. And we thought this needed to be first because we thought this is really where so many of the problems are. That people don't even have an opportunity. They can't get the first opportunity. So we've defined it as empowering people by providing access to services and the ability to receive and co-create valued services. And then the second one, enabling choices. Because opportunities aren't enough if you don't have much choice. So the choices was next, and that was to empower people with viable choices for configuring their resources, their opportunities, and their skills. And the third one, nurturing and healing. Throughout all of the human systems, there's often a need for healing processes. So we built that into the ideas, providing essential services to close the gaps and fulfill human needs. And we specifically listed 3 in this thing: health, education, and social. Because those are essential, absolutely essential service systems. And the last point, you're fostering happiness, encouraging people to experience the pleasure that services can provide. And specifically defining, of course, the idea of hedonic well-being. So here's our version for pets. So we basically say that we can harmonize the relationships with pets, animals, and nature by broadening the application of the 4 pillars. So it'll take us a little while to figure out exactly how we do this. So our first statement is that our broadening seeks to include humans in all life forms. And I need to pause on all life forms for a moment, because that is a very broad statement. So for example, Alison and I said, but what about the snakes? Do we want to say, and so we have to include the snakes, even though neither one of us likes snakes, and lots of people don't, but they're life forms. An even more obvious example that in human history has been seen as dangerous and bad is bacteria. Modern science says we've got bacteria, each of us, in our microbiome, and we need that bacteria. So we need to include even the microscopic life in thinking about these things. So here's our 4 then: enabling inclusive opportunities, empowering people to include all life forms and service systems. Be more inclusive. Second, to enabling agency, for granting all life forms a sense of agency and respecting their need for agency. When I was a kid, my father had a family dog that he had chained in the backyard. That's not agency. And that was commonplace because it wasn't the only house with a dog chained up in a doghouse. It was the norm. But of course, you wouldn't typically see that in a lot of places in the world. Now, you wouldn't see dogs chained up in a doghouse and all that. Things unfortunately change. That's more of the point of enabling agency. Third one is nurturing healing, providing essential services that serve and protect the needs of the living systems. And there's a lot of problems that humans have caused for the various life forms, a lot of need for healing, whether it be healing the water conditions so that the fish can live more successfully, or the air, or take the forests. I mean, it's a long, long list of things that need healing. And the last one, fostering flourishing, to encouraging meaningful connections, mutual flourishing, and harmony on earth. Again, that word harmony. I really like the word harmony because we know, all of us as humans, the idea of musical harmony. But in Jeremy Lent's book, he's really talking about that interconnection, that somehow the species of the world have found ways of co-inhabiting the planet. So here's our sort of cartoony version of those 4 pillars, inclusive service systems, and each of those pillars is a cat leg. Neither one of us should ever be graphic artists, you can see that. But we had fun doing it. So, some implications then. First, the research implications. The research implications first are that service research should explore human interactions with pets from the perspective of pet experience and pet owner experience. Now, I should note that this is not a commonplace thing in service research, but it is being studied in other fields. And in fact, I think Eric, you're well aware of consumer culture theory. Some of that research has been concerning pets. But we couldn't find any clear evidence that it was happening within the general category of service research. And we thought if we're really going to broaden service, it needs to actually be tagged with service as the label. Next one here is practical implications, how service organizations can optimize the inclusion of pets within service systems. And we're seeing, at least in the context of the United States that I know best, there are a lot of pet-friendly restaurants now. And that wasn't a commonplace thing 20, 30 years ago, but it's quite common. At least in Austin, Texas, area, I'm part of Texas too. So the next point then is societal. How do we redesign societal service systems to be more inclusive of pets and their life? To really think more broadly than how do we just include people. But of course, if you go back to that first inclusion article, a significant part of our human service system is not even including all of the humans. We need to do that, but we also need to remember that we are just one of many species on the planet. And if we aren't paying attention to the rest of the species, it won't go well for us as a species. So we need to think big enough to include life. So the challenge is to make all humanity service systems more animal friendly. And then the last point, the complex challenge is trying to redesign the human service systems to significantly expand opportunities for humans to interact with all life forms, to have more of a sense of why plants matter, why forests matter, why fish matter. And I don't mean like going to the zoo, because that's one of the human problems of putting animals in cages. And sure, there are modern zoos that have much better cages, but it's really to make it possible for life forms to have their own habitat. Earth is humans' habitat, but it's also, in addition to us as having Earth as that habitat, it's all life. We don't know of any life anywhere else. Maybe someday that will be found, but at this point, we know that the only life-giving planet there is, so far, Earth. Okay. So here's one last book to share with you. This is the most recent of the books I've read that we're using in this presentation, Interdependence of Life. I'll mention the book first, and I'll go back to the quote. Paul Hawken is a very well-known environmentalist. The subtitle of that mentions his book, Regeneration, which I also recommend. Carbon's a much shorter book than his Regeneration book, and so the subtitle is the Book of Life. So here's the quote. The ecosystems are interlocking elements of larger energetic systems. It's the interaction of animals, vegetation, and fungi, and it's reciprocal. And then he says, this exchange of energy, this core relationship, is the basis of life. And last, we are entirely dependent upon and intertwined with those systems. So that really captures that same wavelength that Alison and I were on. So I actually started reading this book as we were in the middle of it, and I told Alison, this book really is going to give us another additional perspective on why the ideas are important. It does a great job of describing the role of carbon in our life and many other scientific things in the book, but that captures it in just one quick quote. Okay, so to wrap this up in terms of a conclusion, service research has extensively explored the interactions of customer experience within human experience. In fact, in that one, it's the side of the Elevating the Human Experience article that introduced Sir Collab, but not the interactions of pet experience and pet owner experience. And again, it's the service research hasn't done that. The the end here, we've also got the concept of biota, which refers to all plant and animal life on Earth. Biota. So then we're saying here that this research represents a first exploration of the human experience within the broader context of biota experience. What's the experience of life on Earth? Many forms of life on planet Earth now are suffering. Not to mention many humans are suffering. And the suffering is something mostly that's our fault as a species. So my last point here is that this research adopts an original and holistic perspective on human interactions with life on planet Earth, especially the profound emotional implications, emotional connections that people form with pets. And again, we're starting with pets because we think that's the most obvious connection you could explain to almost any other human. And they would say, well, yeah, we have to include pets, we have to know more about pets. And maybe that can help make us, as a species, more life-friendly than we seem to be now. So to finish, this is one of my favorite pet pictures. My favorite part about cats is that when you look in the eyes of a cat and a cat looks at you, you know that is a different species, a very different species. But here's a different one too. This is a Ray Fisk. Now, one of my favorite things about my last name is that it means fish, and I like eating fish. Never had stingray or met this man. I don't even remember which Ray this is now. But in Scandinavia, Sweden, Finland, Denmark, and Norway, Fisk is, again, the word for fish. And so it's a ray. And so I discovered this by accident one day when I Googled my name, Ray Fisk, as opposed to Raymond Fisk. And I saw pictures of rays. And I thought, oh yeah, of course, it's because my name means fish. And so there's one. And I thought, there's a resemblance there, don't you know? Anyway, last thing to mention to you, I've got various ways you can get involved with Circle. If you're interested in any of that, you can certainly talk to me today too. And here's our connection if you wanted to just take that picture. And you can certainly donate to serve it forward if you'd like to call it. And with that, time for questions.